One morning, Michael Reynolds found his lawn turned into a parking lot by his neighbor's car. When he turned to HOA chairperson Karen Hunt for help, she dismissed him with a smug smile, confident in her authority. But Karen didn't know Michael was quietly gathering evidence to expose the truth. They underestimated the wrong man. Let's start from the beginning. It was an early Saturday morning when the first rays of sunlight peeked through the windows of Michael Reynolds' home. The soft hum of birdsong filled the air as Michael, a veteran and proud father of two, stood on his porch, coffee in hand, admiring the view of his carefully maintained lawn. This small patch of green was more than just grass. It was a testament to years of hard work, a sanctuary of peace in a neighborhood bustling with life. But something was off. Right there in the middle of his lush, manicured lawn stood a car. Not his car, not a visitor's. A black sedan with dusty windows and a dented bumper, a sight that instantly jarred the serenity of his morning. For a moment, Michael just stared, confusion flickering across his face. He rubbed his eyes, half expecting the car to vanish as if it were some early morning mirage. But no, it was real, and it was parked blatantly on his lawn. "Well, this has to be a mistake," Michael muttered under his breath. Setting his coffee cup down, he marched over to the car, examining it for a note or some clue as to why it was there. Nothing. Deciding to address the matter directly, he walked over to his neighbor Tony's house. Tony, notorious for his brash attitude and disregard for others, lived 2 houses down. Michael had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with him, sensing that Tony thrived on confrontation. Still, he believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Knocking firmly on Tony's door, Michael waited. Moments later, the door creaked open to reveal Tony in a rumpled t-shirt and basketball shorts, his expression a mix of annoyance and impatience. "Yeah." Tony grunted, leaning against the doorframe. "Good morning, Tony," Michael began, keeping his tone neutral. "I noticed a car parked on my lawn this morning. Is it yours by any chance?" Tony's eyes flicked to the side before he crossed his arms, his demeanor hardening. "Yeah, that's mine. What about it?" Michael blinked, taken aback by the bluntness. "Well, it's on my property, and I'd appreciate it if you could move it. You see, it's damaging the grass and—" Before Michael could finish, Tony cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Look, Reynolds, the street's packed, okay? There's no room to park anywhere else. You've got plenty of space on that lawn of yours. What's the big deal?" For a moment, Michael was at a loss for words. "Tony, it's not about space. It's about respecting boundaries. That's my property." Tony snorted, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Boundaries? You're really going to make a fuss over this? Some of us have real problems, you know. Just let it go." And with that, Tony stepped back inside and shut the door in Michael's face. Michael stood there for a moment, the weight of Tony's dismissal sinking in. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but so did disbelief. How could someone be so cavalier about something so basic? Respect for another person's property. Walking back to his porch, Michael glanced at his lawn again, now scared with tire tracks. He clenched his jaw, a determined glint in his eyes. This isn't just about the lawn, he thought. This is about standing up for what's right. And just like that, the quiet harmony of his suburban life began to unravel. The next morning, Michael stepped outside, hoping for a fresh start, only to be greeted by an unpleasant sight that made his heart sink. The once pristine lawn he had so carefully tended now resembled a construction site. Deep tire tracks crisscrossed the grass, leaving behind patches of churned-up dirt and broken blades. His chest tightened as he surveyed the damage. This wasn't just a careless mistake. It felt deliberate, like an act of defiance etched into the earth itself. Michael knelt down, running his fingers over the torn grass as if trying to assess the extent of the injury to his cherished property. It wasn't just the lawn. It was a part of his home, a place where his kids played, where family barbecues brought laughter, and where he found peace. And now it was a battlefield. Frustration bubbling, Michael decided it was time to escalate the matter to the Homeowners Association, HOA. If anyone had the authority to mediate and ensure community standards were upheld, it was them, or so he thought. Arriving at the HOA office, Michael was met by Karen Hunt, the association's chairperson, a woman whose reputation for micromanaging and dismissing complaints preceded her. Karen sat behind her desk, her expression one of thinly veiled impatience as Michael explained the situation. "Karen, this isn't just a small issue," Michael pleaded, his voice steady but firm. "Tony's car has destroyed part of my property. I need the HOA to step in and address this." Karen leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a dismissive smile. "Michael, let's be reasonable. It's just a little grass, isn't it? Surely we can let this slide. After all, we're neighbors. Harmony is key in a community like ours." Michael felt his patience wearing thin. It's not just about the grass. It's about respect and boundaries. If this goes unchecked, what's next? Parking in someone's driveway, building on someone else's property. Karen waved her hand, brushing off his concerns as though they were nothing more than trivial complaints. "You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I'm sure you two can work it out on your own. Let's not waste resources on something so minor." Michael left the meeting feeling more disheartened than ever. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to help, and any hope of resolving this peacefully had just been dashed. As he walked back home, a sense of determination began to take root. If no one else would stand up for what was right, he would. That evening, Michael began installing cameras around his property. He carefully positioned them to capture any future incidents, knowing that he would need solid evidence to confront Tony or anyone else who decided to test his resolve. The cameras became his silent witnesses, a shield against the growing tide of disrespect. But Tony was quick to notice the new additions. The next day, Michael found trash, fast food wrappers, empty cans, and other debris scattered across his lawn. It was a clear message. Tony wasn't backing down. Later that evening, as Michael was tidying up the mess, Tony appeared at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed and a smirk plastered across his face. "What's with the cameras, Reynolds? You trying to play detective now?" Michael straightened, meeting Tony's gaze with calm resolve. "They're there to protect my property, Tony. If you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry about them." Tony took a step closer, his tone turning sharp. "You think you're so clever, huh? Let me tell you something. You're wasting your time. No one cares about your precious grass." For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. But Michael held his ground, refusing to let Tony's intimidation get the better of him. Without another word, Tony turned and walked away, but Michael knew this was far from over. As the sun set that evening, Michael sat on his porch, the cool breeze brushing against his face. He felt the weight of the day's events pressing down on him, but he also felt a spark of resolve burning brighter than ever. This wasn't just about his lawn. It was about standing up for himself and for what was right. And no matter how messy things got, Michael wasn't going to back down. Michael sat at his dining table, the morning sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating a stack of papers, his laptop, and a steaming cup of coffee. His frustration with Tony and the lack of support from the HOA had reached its peak. It was time to take decisive action. After hours of research and consultations, Michael had finally found his answer. He had the legal right to call for Tony's car to be towed if it was parked on his property without permission. The relief he felt was immense, as though a weight had been lifted. Over the next few days, Michael got to work. Armed with his camera footage, he meticulously documented every instance of Tony's car invading his lawn, the tire tracks, the repeated damage, and even Tony's confrontational attitude. All of it was carefully logged and stored. Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to reclaiming his peace of mind and sending a clear message. Enough was enough. But Karen Hunt, the chairperson of the HOA, wasn't about to make things easy. News of Michael's preparations had apparently reached her ears, and she made a point of addressing the matter during a neighborhood meeting. Standing before the small crowd of residents in her meticulously pressed blazer, Karen delivered a thinly veiled critique. "As the HOA, we are here to protect the rights and harmony of all our residents," she declared, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's important to remember that small disagreements between neighbors should not be escalated unnecessarily. We are a community, after all." Michael clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists beneath the table. It was clear she was trying to undermine him, to paint his efforts as petty and disruptive. But as he looked around the room, he noticed a few neighbors exchanging glances, their expressions tinged with doubt. It was obvious that Karen's stance wasn't winning everyone over. Then came the morning that changed everything. Michael woke up to the now familiar sight of Tony's black sedan parked squarely on his lawn, as if mocking him. But today was different. Michael calmly picked up his phone, dialed the number of the local towing service, and provided them with the necessary information. Within half an hour, the tow truck arrived, its rumbling engine announcing its presence. Michael stood on his porch, his arms crossed, watching as the truck backed onto his driveway and positioned itself to haul away Tony's car. It was a moment of quiet triumph, the culmination of days of preparation. Tony, however, was less than pleased. The sound of the tow truck must have drawn him out of his house, because soon enough he came storming out, his face a deep shade of red. "What do you think you're doing?" Tony bellowed, pointing an accusatory finger at Michael. "You can't do this. You don't have the right." Michael stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Actually, I do. Your car has been parked on my property without permission for weeks. I've documented everything and consulted with an attorney. This is completely within my rights." Tony's anger boiled over as he gestured wildly at the tow truck driver, who continued his work without so much as a glance in Tony's direction. "This is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing." Michael didn't flinch. "This isn't nothing, Tony. This is about respecting boundaries. You've had plenty of chances to stop this, but you chose not to." As the tow truck drove away with Tony's car, the tension hung thick in the air. Tony stomped back to his house, slamming the door behind him, but not before throwing one last glare in Michael's direction. Michael exhaled deeply, the adrenaline coursing through him beginning to fade. Standing on his now empty lawn, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had taken control of the situation. The battle wasn't over, but this was a victory, and it was one he wouldn't soon forget. The air in the neighborhood seemed heavier, charged with whispers and tension after Tony's car had been towed. Karen Hunt, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, wasted no time stirring up trouble. She called an emergency meeting where she positioned herself as the defender of the community, painting Michael as a rogue resident who cared little for harmony. "This kind of behavior undermines the trust and unity we strive for," Karen declared, her tone righteous. She swept her gaze across the room, ensuring every neighbor felt the weight of her words. "Michael Reynolds' actions don't reflect the values of our community. We need to hold him accountable." Michael, standing at the back of the room, clenched his fists. He wanted to speak up, to defend himself, but he knew this wasn't the time. Karen had been at this for years, using her influence to twist narratives and suppress dissent. This wasn't her first campaign of whispers, but Michael was determined to make it her last. Karen's efforts didn't stop at the meeting. She began circulating rumors, suggesting that Michael was a troublemaker who prioritized his pride over the neighborhood's well-being. Some neighbors, initially unsure of what to believe, started to question Michael's motives. But Michael was ready. Over the past weeks, he had carefully compiled evidence, not just of Tony's repeated infractions, but of Karen's dismissive attitude and blatant favoritism. He had video footage of Tony's threats, audio recordings of confrontations, and clear documentation of Karen's refusal to mediate. Armed with these, Michael decided it was time to act. The next morning, he visited the local police department, presenting his evidence to an officer who listened intently. The video of Tony threatening Michael while standing on his lawn left no room for doubt. The officer assured Michael that this behavior was unacceptable and warranted further investigation. For the first time, Michael felt like the scales were tipping in his favor. Back in the neighborhood, the rumors Karen had sown began to unravel. Michael's evidence didn't just remain with the police. It started to circulate among the neighbors. Videos of Tony's blatant disrespect and Karen's dismissive remarks were shared in hushed conversations, quickly gaining traction. "I knew there was more to this," one neighbor exclaimed during an informal gathering. "Karen's been sweeping things under the rug for too long." "I've had my own issues with her," another chimed in. She only helps if you're in her inner circle. The more people learned about Michael's ordeal, the more they sympathized with him. What had initially seemed like a personal feud now revealed a larger issue: the unchecked power Karen wielded over the HOA and her tendency to favor certain residents at the expense of others. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began reaching out to Michael, offering support and sharing their own grievances. The tide was turning, and Karen could feel her grip slipping. For the first time, she found herself on the defensive as whispers of dissatisfaction grew louder and more unified. Michael, though relieved, remained focused. He knew this was just the beginning. Karen's attempts to silence him had backfired, and the community was starting to see the truth. The cracks in her facade were widening, and Michael was determined to make sure they wouldn't be repaired. For now, he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. As he stood on his porch that evening, watching his children play in the yard, he felt a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he wasn't standing alone. The community was waking up, and together, they were stronger than Karen ever anticipated. Weeks passed, and the tension that had gripped the neighborhood began to shift. Michael Reynolds, steadfast and methodical, filed an official complaint against Karen Hunt and the HOA. The claims were clear: negligence in addressing community concerns and defamation aimed at undermining his reputation. The evidence Michael presented was indisputable: recordings of Karen's dismissive comments, documentation of her inaction, and undeniable proof of Tony's repeated trespasses on Michael's property. The day of the hearing was crisp and bright, the kind of day that felt like a clean slate. Michael arrived at the courthouse carrying a folder thick with evidence. He was calm, his resolve as firm as the morning sun overhead. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. Karen sat with a stiff posture, her usual air of authority replaced by a nervous tension. Tony, looking far less defiant than usual, avoided Michael's gaze entirely. Michael presented his case with precision. The footage of Tony's threats and repeated parking violations painted a vivid picture of harassment. But the turning point came when Michael played an audio clip of Karen brushing off his concerns during an HOA meeting, her words dismissive and laced with condescension, echoed in the silent courtroom. "This is just petty drama. Let's not waste time on it." The judge's decision was swift and clear. Karen was found to have violated her duties as HOA chairperson, neglecting the needs of the community she was meant to serve. Tony, too, was held accountable for repeatedly trespassing on Michael's property, with the added penalty of covering the impound fees for his car, which remained locked away until every fine was paid. Karen's resignation came quickly after the ruling. For years, she had operated with an air of invincibility, but now her authority had crumbled. The neighborhood convened to elect a new HOA board, one focused on fairness and transparency. For the first time in years, the community felt hopeful about its future. Back at home, Michael stood on his freshly repaired lawn, watching his children chase each other in the afternoon sun. The tire tracks were gone, replaced by a vibrant stretch of green, a symbol of both recovery and resilience. Neighbors began stopping by to thank him, sharing their own stories of frustrations they'd kept to themselves for too long. At the next HOA meeting, Michael addressed the group, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "It's important to stand up for what's right," he said, looking out at the faces of his neighbors. "This isn't just about property lines or rules. It's about respect. Injustice can only grow when we stay silent. We have the power to protect what's ours, but it starts with speaking up." Applause erupted in the room, a genuine and heartfelt acknowledgement of the struggle Michael had endured. His fight had inspired others, showing them that even against overwhelming odds, change was possible and driven by determination and truth. As Michael returned home that evening, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The storm had passed, and in its wake, he had regained not only his lawn but also his sense of security and pride. For the first time in months, he could sit on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, knowing he had done what was right, not just for himself, but for his entire community.